So in this segment, we're going to be talking about small exporters shifting operations out of the UK due to Brexit, according to a survey. So this great work from The Independent and Channel 4's dispatches. So more than 1 in 10 small to medium-sized exporters (SMEs) have lost trade with the EU since Brexit, a survey has suggested. A total of 13% of exporters said their trade with the EU has fallen by up to 100% since the end of the Brexit transition period on the 31st of December, the Institute of Directors survey for Channel 4's dispatches have said. So the phrasing here is a bit dodgy. I mean, it could be they've lost 1% of trade, they could be they've lost 50% of trade. But the key thing is that these exporters have lost a lot of money due to Brexit and are considering moving operations to the EU, which furthers the losses made for the British Exchequer and for jobs in the UK, and will create more jobs and more tax revenue in the EU. We've spoken previously about the Cheshire Cheese guy, how he was told essentially to move to France and to set up shop there for his cheese company so he can continue to export cheeses to essentially France and other EU members because of Brexit. A quarter, so 26% of SMEs that trade with the EU are now considering moving some of their European operations outside of Brexit, while 16% said they already decided to move some or all into the single market. Now, the key thing is the rules aren't as bad as they could be. The EU doesn't do as many physical checks as it could do. Also, the fact that rules of origins checks won't actually kick in properly until next year. There's apparently just a box they tick to say, yes, this complies with rules of origins. But from next year, they're going to have to actually show the documentation. And certain farms will have to show that they have, EU accreditation. Accreditation, is that a word? They are EU accredited, essentially. Something the Express Film hungered about recently. And if I find the story, I'll cover it. But once those kick in, I think a lot more SMEs will be making the move into Europe, at least setting up subsidiaries within Europe. Nearly 2/3, 62% of companies that trade with the EU say their costs have risen because of customs checks and also the loss of HGV drivers, among other issues, and the vast majority, 70%, have said they've had to absorb this themselves, the survey of 635 SMEs suggested. So because they've had to absorb the costs, that means more losses, potentially less profit, so they can't expand out as much as they possibly could have done. Also, it means less corporation tax for the government, so again, the exchequer gets hit. Up to £9.5 billion worth of UK exports to the EU between January and July have had tariffs placed on them, despite Johnson's quote tariff-free deal. But again, if it falls foul of rules of origins checks and other things, tariffs can still be liable. I think there was some sort of issue with cupcakes which came to the UK, were repackaged but not actually changed, and then exported back into the EU, which were hit with tariffs. And there's still things like customs duties and other things that have to be paid for. That could be a part of that not £9.5 billion cost, but the costs that have incurred because of Brexit. Customs duties are a pain. I know that firsthand. Over the same period, imports from the EU fell by nearly a quarter, while exports to the EU fell by 13.1%. So it's interesting that imports from the EU have fallen so dramatically, possibly down to the lack of lorry drivers and also the economy being shut down. So it depends the same period. So if it's between January and July, possibly down to the lockdown, because the lockdown kicked in March. It's a bit difficult because they don't give out the full numbers here. It's an interesting piece from Dominic Cummings. Maybe I'll cover that at some point. Shadow Trade Secretary Thornberry said the government can no longer bury its head in the sand and ignore the impacts of their botched Brexit deal. They absolutely 100% can, because the electorate aren't going to hold them accountable. So yeah, they can continue to hide and blame the pandemic for it. We urgently need a plan to fix the holes in the deal, cut the red tape consuming our exporters, and stop the loss of trade and jobs before it gets even worse. Well, that's not going to happen, is it? Especially because that's not all unilateral either. A government spokesperson told the programme that businesses had support to continue trading with the EU, including the Export Support Service, to provide one-to-one advice, which I'm pretty sure they were the ones who told the Cheshire Cheese guy to set up a subsidiary within the EU. That's the kind of advice you can get. Like, oh, you're having export problems to the EU, why don't you set up shop there? And of course, that's going to create jobs in the EU whilst taking away jobs from the UK. Import controls have meanwhile been delayed to next year, giving businesses more time to adjust. Whilst the process, that's not true either. That's poor framing from the Independent. The reason we're not doing import checks is because we don't have the facilities for that. We don't have the staff. Whilst the process for exporting are set by the EU, we will continue to give businesses the support they need to trade effectively with the EU. Well, you're not giving them the financial support, so that's not true. You're not helping them that much at all. The zero tariff, zero quota deal we have secured with the EU means we can now regulate in a way that suits the UK. Blah 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 blah. Doing things in a more innovative blah 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 way. Load of rubbish, absolute nonsense once again. And the only support that these guys are getting, these businesses are getting from this support line is, oh, have you thought about moving or setting up a subsidiary within the EU? Doesn't really help them. It doesn't help the British taxpayer. It doesn't help anyone apart from the EU. But these businesses really don't have a choice. If they want to continue exporting, they are going to have to set up a subsidiary or some sort of warehousing within the EU to continue to trade, because next year exports can be way more difficult to do because of rules of origin checks. They're talking about 17-mile tailbacks, which is something we're going to cover about in a separate video. But if that does happen, your exports are going to go up in price dramatically, as well as they might not even make it there. Because if someone else's stuff on the lorry hasn't got the correct paperwork, your stuff's getting sent back. So if I was an exporting company, if I had any significant amount of exports to the EU, I would seriously be looking at setting up a subsidiary over there, because in the UK, if you continue as is, you're going to be in trouble. But anyways, I'm going to leave it there. Let me know what you think in the comments below. Like, comment, share, subscribe, support the channel on Patreon if you can, and hopefully I'll see you in the next one.